Start my little timer here. How's my voice if I'm here? Am I good in the back?
Yeah.
All right, great. So thank you everyone who's been part of this. It's been a really fun and stimulating workshop. To Dominic, Matt, everyone, Andrea, everyone who's helped bring us all together. And I'm going to talk to you about actually a sort of third project. You've heard about my two other projects briefly, but this is a third project I'm interested in looking at, tentatively titled The Forgotten King. And the sort of core question behind this is I'm interested in thinking about older or legacy energy systems as the center of our analysis. That there is a sense in much energy history and much energy humanities on the new. And I'm curious if we flip that around, what we might learn. So today's talk is going to be a bunch of questions and ideas about this, not a lot of firm conclusions, but hopefully you can help me think through this and we can have some discussion of it. I talked some about this in a previous context in which I was explicitly encouraged to throw out some provocations. So I'm going to throw out some provocations. I don't know how much I'll provoke you with these, but at least I'll punctuate my talk with a few different points that maybe we can keep discussing. So one provocation, part of this, and part of thinking about coal, is that I would argue energy humanities has paid far too much attention to oil and far too little to coal. Coal is, simply put, the single most important world historical fossil fuel by and large. It established the patterns of modern life, patterns of economic growth, of substitution of mechanical power for individual power. Pretty much all the major changes we associate with fossil fuels, I would argue, are heavily grounded in coal and only somewhat accentuated by oil. And so I think, in general, oil draws us. It is sexy, it is provocative, but sometimes I think it takes us away from coal. So, provocation one. All right, so in this project that I want to think about, part of the question is, why is coal no longer king, right? King coal was a 19th century concept that we have, and we no longer think about it. And there's a bunch of fairly straightforward reasons for it. So obviously it's decreased its share of the energy mix. It used to be about 75% in America of primary energy, and it's down to 30% or something like that. It doesn't have the strategic dimensions of oil. We don't go to war over coal because it's more dispersed than oil is. And part of it's, we've been talking of a theme, obviously, throughout this conference has been the visibility and invisibility of energy sources, and coal is now particularly invisible in its consumption through its transformation into electric power. And there's certainly processes of normalization, routinization. We've been using it so long that it doesn't seem novel or to draw our attention. So these obviously are logical reasons we don't pay much attention to it, but I still would suggest we should care still. And reasons we should care still is, first, that coal use is still rising in the US. This is actually now a questionable claim over the last 3 to 4 years, but if we take the period 2012 and before, the trend has been of rising. And it's certainly the case in much of the rest of the world. Obviously, the climate implications are very significant. We have not done away with the process of mining coal and the consequences that that has had. And I think generally the point that I want to sort of discuss with you is the idea of, if we paid greater attention to older, I'm not sure if this word legacy systems is actually the right word, but simply put, that if we paid attention to the older systems, how might this influence what we do? So, another little provocation to throw out there is, as people in the medical field will say, Ebola came up as a major study, and people were like, we've got to pay attention to this at a time when flu still kills many, many more people. And so I think there's an analogy with energy history, that we've got a persistent source of energy with major implications that doesn't seem fun to study, and yet is really important to do so. So one could cite any number of books that don't do a really good job of taking on this question. First and foremost is my own book, which of course does look at the rise of novel energy sources, and there's room for both of these. But part of what it's great to be a scholar is we can write multiple books from multiple perspectives and rewrite some of our own past. So I have worked in the opposite idiom of what I'm describing today. So my goal in doing this is to produce a kind of different type of book. It's actually, what I'm looking to produce in this is not a long archival book, but actually a shorter, more speculative book, particularly designed for classroom use. And I kind of have a particular illicit love child in mind, which is to start with a sort of noted book in the history of technology called The Shock of the Old, in which David Edgerton looks at the persistence of older technologies in contemporary life and draws our attention to those in the same way that I want to draw our attention to older energy systems and their persistence. And then I want to combine that with a book like Richard White's Organic Machine, a wonderfully written, concise, short, provocative book that hopefully could allow me to write something like a 50,000 word book that would be appropriate for teaching, provoking thought, and reflecting on energy systems. It seems like that this might be the right package for the type of material I'm thinking about. So that's what I'm working towards. And a big question in sort of defining this project that I think is worth ongoing discussion is simply this question of how do we measure significance? Is it novelty? Is it technological advance or sophistication? Is it relative market share or absolute consumption? Is it the durability of a system? Is it its visibility? Is it its environmental consequences? Right, and obviously we're not going to just pick one of these, but I'm trying to think about in this project, what does it mean from an energy humanities perspective to measure the significance of different systems and discuss that. And so my provocation on this front is that certainly in the context of energy history, far too much time is spent on novelty and technological advance, and too little on durability and energy practices. And I'll sort of go back and forth between energy history and energy humanities. I am an energy historian, so I feel more confident about my claims in energy history than I do in the full domain of energy humanities. But wherever it's energy history, perhaps we can sub-energy humanities as well. All right, so let me quickly walk you through sort of 4 different ways, sort of slices through this question that I'm thinking about. I've got a bunch more, but limited time to kind of see how I might explore this topic in a way, again, with the goal of sort of stimulating thought and raising ideas for students. So this is one of my favorite charts in energy history. This is sort of reproduced in many, many textbooks. And it's a chart from the 80s where the sort of really squiggly lines are the actual consumption and the dotted lines are the plotted expectations of growth. And so, a couple of things that are really great about this is, for example, coal is described as going directly down. That's the sort of perception of what's going on. Same thing with wood going completely down. Nuclear shows no sign of decline whatsoever here, of course. And oil is supposed to continue forever. Right, we all know energy forecasts go wrong, but this is a really great visual representation, I think, of what the popular perception of coal is. It's on this downward spectrum. But the reality, certainly in the US context, is that coal hasn't gone away, and if we compare 1900 to 2000, it's over a 5-fold increase in the amount of coal that has been consumed, and we only, well, maybe it's 2008 that's our peak, not 12, but only in the last several 5 to 10 years with the rise of fracking has coal shown a dip, but there have been dips before and it's gone back up. It's not clear exactly what that trend is going to be. So, just thinking about the relative share of the energy mix, we do see coal going from its, that's wood, we do see coal going from its peak at World War I period of 70% or more, down to its current level of about 25 to 30%. But what's notable is it's actually been fairly stable at that level for a while, showing a sort of durability. Same level as natural gas, and really not that far off of where oil is. And if we think about its absolute consumption, again, we see this chart where the general trend is up, with the kind of interesting thing here being that natural gas and coal have been in tandem for the last several decades, except that fracking is directly displacing some coal right now in the market. Now, this is a story I don't want to be just about the US, so we have a very different story in Britain, for example, about the patterns of coal production, where it has actually gone down enormously, but Britain's one of the rare cases. We go to China, of course, and we see patterns of increase that are steady. We see the same thing if we switch over to India to look there. And obviously, a lot of this shift is going on outside of the sort of original industrialized world. So most of the gains are anticipated to come in other places. But even the fact that OECD countries are expected to maintain their level, I think, is significant and worth looking at it. And obviously, the other aspect of this story is that enormous quantities of coal remain. That we have the twin problems that we don't have enough fossil fuel to use it forever, but we have far too much to keep our climate steady the way we would like it. And so we have both too much and too little. And as you guys all know, coal plays a disproportionate role in greenhouse gases, because even if it's being used at the same rate as natural gas, there's more carbon in coal, less than natural gas, and so the climate impacts of coal are more significant. So just from a numbers perspective, coal is not going away. It's still there. It's potentially increasing depending on which you're looking at. So we can sort of at a very, very simplistic level say it's not going away. So one of the other things, though, this has gotten me thinking about is that I want this book to use coal as an entree for thinking about energy systems more generally. And so I've been trying to think about what happens to other energy sources when a transition occurs. Right? So again, in my first book, I look at the rise of coal, the rise of oil, and the rise of electricity, and pay a little attention to the other things going on, but not a ton. And so I want to think, I've been trying to think a little more systematically about what happens to other energy sources when something else seems to be getting the spotlight. And so I'm thinking about 3 different classes of energy system losers, and losers might be the wrong title again, but it's early in the morning and not here, we might as well have a little fun with our words. So we can think of the rapidly vanquished, which I also think is my Cleveland sports teams that I like to follow, or the French army in recent conflict. So what, new energy source comes in, immediately displaces the others. That could be one category. Then we can think about the lingers, which are sort of energy sources that stick around for many, many decades before finally declining. And this could be thought of as that coal that your kid brings home from daycare and passes slowly from one member of the household to the other, with taking forever to go away. And then the third category could be we could think about as the survivors. And I will tap in shamelessly to the cultural zeitgeist and interest in zombie to suggest that perhaps these are zombie energy sources. All right, so my provocation for this is that actually the popular vision of energy, I think, is that the rapidly vanquished or the lingers are the most common pattern, and I think actually they might be the least common pattern, and that influences how we think and talk about energy systems. So let me talk about some examples of what these are, and I'd love in the Q&A if you have other ideas of what these are. So the model for the rapidly vanquished, again, is sort of a rapid decline in the face of a new competitor to a point of pretty much near insignificance. So right, one of the famous examples is coal oil. In the 1850s, people distilled coal into a liquid to make kerosene out of it, and as soon as petroleum is found in large markets, this whole industry is converted to refining petroleum very quickly. Camphene is arguably another story. This is a kind of particularly American lighting source derived from turpentine that gets pushed out of the market pretty quickly once petroleum-based kerosene comes up. Maybe whale oil fits this, although there's also, as many people note, our peat whale came a while before petroleum was actually discovered, so what its dynamics are may or may not fit into that. So write down and let me know if you have other examples of what this might be. So another category would be the lingers, so energy sources that continue to increase their output as another energy source comes along and stay there for several decades before going on. So I think about manufactured gas this way. Right? Manufactured gas, town gas, comes in many, at least American cities, 1820s, 1830s. It is challenged both by kerosene and by electricity, but manufactured gas companies are running into the early decades of the 20th century, and it's a while before that really gets phased out. And firewood is another example that There's even persistence of firewood in cities today, although the numbers are quite low. So I think of those as sort of this linger categories. And again, if you have other examples, let me know. And then the survivors we could talk about. So energy sources that continue to increase in steady output, at least on a scale of 5 to 10 decades, may not even decline at all, or if so, only do so really slowly. So of course I'm counting coal in this category. Another example is sort of sailing ships, which do not get pushed out by steamboats, but in fact expand their use dramatically for at least a century before the sort of eclipse comes in. Biomass is something else we can think about this. It's not the same level of firewood in the urban city, but the use of biomass has been fairly consistent, and certainly, if we take a global perspective, has not declined. And kerosene is another example where global kerosene use is still quite significant for billions of people without access to electricity. So, and again, if you have other examples. So part of what I want to do in this project is start to think more systematically about what the other energy sources are. All right, I'm going to go quickly here because I'm getting up on my time. Part of this is, of course, the politics of visibility and invisibility. And I think part of the point here is that often energy transitions are described in shifts in fuel, but not shifts in consumption patterns. And thinking about shifts in consumption patterns may help us see new things. So, right, part of the big energy transition of coal is that we don't touch, see, feel, or smell coal because really coal isn't coal anymore for most modern American consumers. It's electricity. Right, huge quantities of coal are, of course, being used, but not in a place that we see them. And part of why this has happened is actually a historical pattern of shifts in where energy plants are located. For the first 3 decades of the electric industry, they were built in downtown areas. This Pratt Street Station is located in Baltimore on the harbor, and the model now is to sort of build plants much further. So I'm sorry that this map doesn't have these sort of actual urban locations on it, but basically what you would see is a sort of 10, 15, 20 mile gap between where these are and where major urban areas are. And I would argue that this is definitely not unintentional, right? This is utility executives know it's a good idea to be further away, and they get really good at, for example, making sure their emissions look white. Like this is not just water vapor coming out of all of these cooling towers. Well, the cooling towers maybe, but the other stacks. If you look at these with UV cameras, you see all kinds of other stuff going on. But there is a politics of visibility where people work very hard to make sure what's coming out is as clear as possible. So the point of this is coal has become more invisible through very conscious decisions of sort of how burning processes are managed and where these plants are found. And a final point is I'd also like to just think about what else are we missing if we're not paying attention to older energy systems. And I'll mention two very quickly. And another provocation to throw out here is that food is actually if coal is the most significant fossil fuel, food is actually the essential energy system of what we do. And yet it rarely makes its way into accounts that are focused after the 19th century, right? So it's great having our energy slaves, or I might have to rework this talk with your wonderful 30-ton beam that we are, but if we couldn't power our bodies, all of our energy slaves would do nothing for us. Like, right, food still remains essential to what we do, even though we conceive this. So, what would it, in our era of abundant energy slaves, how can we bring food into the question? And I think kerosene sort of fits this as well, because billions of people are using kerosene. We thought of kerosene as the era of first oil, and right now it is a tiny fraction of total oil use, but it's consequential for the people who use it. And also, kerosene lamps produce black carbon, which is one of these greenhouse gases that is thousands of times worse than carbon dioxide. So even at lower levels, it's actually really significant. So using this to think about those is something I want to do. So I will actually, I'm right about at time, so I will wrap up there and look forward to your thoughts. Thanks.